Society may scoff, but dignity is the last fortress one may cling to even when abandoned to the frost. The grand ballroom of Ashbourne House glimmered with 1,000 points of candlelight, each flame dancing upon gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers, casting reflections as sharp and cold as the whispers circling the room. Gentlemen in tailored coats and ladies in sumptuous silks glided across the polished parquet, their laughter measured, their eyes alight with the practiced art of appraisal. And yet, amid this glittering spectacle, one figure moved with hesitancy, a fragile presence on the edge of admiration and derision. She was a young lady of modest fortune, known to society as the daughter of a minor viscount, yet tonight her lineage offered her no shield. Her gown, though carefully chosen, clung awkwardly at the shoulders, and the delicate lace at her wrists seemed almost conspicuous, as if drawing attention to every tremor of nervous anticipation. The murmurs began almost immediately, a tilt of a head here, a subtle pursing of lips there. "She looks plain," one whispered, her words dripping like icy rain. "Do you see her chin?" "Such harsh angles," murmured another, voices lilting in cruel harmony. Her hands, gloved and pale, twisted the folds of her skirt, and she lowered her eyes to avoid the scrutiny. Each whispered comment felt as if 1,000 invisible daggers had been drawn across her very being, cutting not her flesh but her spirit. She had rehearsed her entrance 1,000 times, practiced the perfect poise, yet the moment her skirts brushed the polished floor, she realized that society's gaze was rarely merciful to those who did not conform to its ideal of beauty. And then, as though fate delighted in her discomfort, the orchestra's melody swelled, and the Duke entered. He was a man of commanding presence, tall and impeccably attired, yet it was not his coat of midnight velvet or the glint of a diamond at his waist that captured attention. It was the quiet authority in his gaze, a storm behind calm eyes that seemed to read the hearts of all who dared to cross his path. He paused at the edge of the room, surveying the gathering with measured indifference, until those eyes, piercing and unflinching, fell upon her. For a fleeting heartbeat, hope stirred, a flicker of warmth against the chill of humiliation, but she dared not meet it fully, fearing the scorn of those who lingered close. She retreated toward the far corner, near the frost-kissed windows where moonlight touched her cheeks with a pale, forgiving hand. Outside, London streets were slick with rain, the wind rattling carriage wheels and sweeping up stray autumn leaves, as if the city itself conspired to mirror her inner desolation. The whispers continued, growing sharper. A lady offered a patronizing smile, a gentleman allowed his laugh to linger a fraction too long. Each glance branded her with invisible shame, a silent verdict rendered by eyes that valued superficial grace over substance. She drew in a shuddering breath, willing herself to stand taller, to summon courage from some hidden well, but the weight of rejection pressed upon her like the frost itself, unyielding and cruel. It was then, amid the murmurs and the glittering crowd, that the Duke's voice broke the cold air, low and deliberate, carrying just enough for her to hear alone. "The world may judge harshly, yet not all eyes seek to wound." He did not approach. He merely observed, a solitary figure at the room's periphery, his presence both a comfort and a challenge. The words, whispered without ceremony, struck her with unexpected force, stirring the first fragile ember of defiance in her chest. She felt the shift almost imperceptibly, an awareness that the room's judgment, though loud and unrelenting, did not define her entirety. Yet, as she stole one hesitant glance toward him, the Duke turned slightly, attention wandering elsewhere, and the ember dimmed to a fragile glow, leaving her suspended between humiliation and hope. With that, she retreated fully to the shadows of the far corner, the murmurs following her like spectral companions, and the ballroom resumed its polished rhythm, oblivious to the small, private revolt taking root within a single, overlooked heart. The audience, if one could call them that, saw only a lady overwhelmed by society's cruelty. The attentive eye, however, would discern the stirrings of something far more potent, a resilience that would soon demand to be reckoned with. And as the final notes of the waltz echoed, carrying both the weight of scorn and the faint promise of change, the scene closed with her gaze lifted slightly, meeting the flicker of candlelight as though she were daring it to reflect the courage she had yet to claim. The frost around her heart had not melted, but a solitary warmth had found purchase, whispering that her story was far from its conclusion, and that one man's gaze, intent, unyielding and quietly defiant, might yet alter the course of her destiny. Even the smallest gesture may shatter the fortress of ridicule, leaving a crack through which hope may bloom. The days following the humiliating assembly at Ashbourne House were cloaked in relentless scrutiny, as society's whispers trailed her like shadows at dusk. Each encounter in drawing rooms, on cobbled streets, or at private salons brought the same chilly appraisal, the same subtle slicing of words meant to wound. Yet amid the sting of ridicule, a quiet disturbance began to stir, an anomaly in the rigid choreography of gossip. It began with a note, delicately folded and perfumed, left on the edge of her dressing table. She discovered it one mist-laden morning, the candlelight catching the script in a gentle glow. The ink flowed in elegant loops, precise and measured, a language of civility that masked daring audacity. Do not let the world's gaze define the measure of your worth. There are eyes that see beyond the veneer, it read and signed yet unmistakably his. A thrill ran through her, a heartbeat stolen by courage disguised as courtesy. She read it twice, then thrice, each time tracing the delicate curves of letters as if their shape alone could insulate her from derision. The Duke's interventions were subtle, almost imperceptible to the world. A carriage left waiting at her door, though no invitation was extended. A single rose, white as winter snow, laid upon her writing desk. A book placed on a bench in the garden, open to a passage that seemed to speak directly to her unspoken fears. Each token was a silent declaration, a challenge to society's cruel hierarchy, and though she dared not acknowledge it publicly, her heart leaned toward the daring intimacy of these gestures. Yet society, ever vigilant, noticed. Whispers twisted the benevolence into scandal. Have you seen the Duke's attentions to her? Surely, it is impropriety, one lady hissed behind a fan, her eyes glinting with calculated venom. A note here, a carriage there, so carefully orchestrated, another added, lips pursed in suspicion. The salons buzzed with conjecture. Some claimed secret meetings, others suggested the faintest blush was evidence of a liaison most improper. And though the heroine sought only the faint comfort of acknowledgement, society painted her desire as a transgression. Through it all, she maintained her composure, a delicate mask of polite restraint hiding the quickening of her pulse. Each encounter with the Duke, however fleeting, was a study in controlled tension. He would appear at the periphery of gatherings, a figure of measured detachment, and yet the tilt of his head, the subtle narrowing of his gaze in her direction, conveyed volumes unspoken. In those moments, the world's scrutiny seemed to waver, if only briefly, and she felt a stirring of audacious hope. One evening, beneath the amber glow of a gaslit street, a carriage passed her, slow and deliberate, leaving a single carefully folded note upon the damp cobblestones. She retrieved it, hands trembling, and read the words penned with that same refined daring. Do not fear the judgment of many. Only the courage of one heart may redeem you. The rain had begun to fall, misting the note with silver beads, yet she could not let go. She pressed it to her chest, feeling the weight of meaning far beyond its fragile paper. But scandal, like a creeping vine, continued to wind its tendrils. Rumors reached her of a letter intercepted by a rival family, a story of favoritism twisted into a tale of impropriety, and she found herself caught between fear and fascination. Each whispered accusation tested the fragile trust forming between her and the Duke, and yet, for every shadow of doubt, there was a token, small, deliberate, and unyielding, that reminded her she was seen, truly seen, in a manner the world could not touch. The tension coiled tighter when society's scrutiny turned audibly hostile at a private garden gathering. The heroine, standing beneath the boughs of a rose-laden arbor, felt the weight of many eyes upon her as rumors swirled like autumn leaves. Then, as if drawn by instinct rather than coincidence, the Duke appeared, silent at first, his presence commanding the space without a word. In his hand, a single rose, white and pristine, offered not as a gift to impress the crowd, but as a shield against their judgment. She took it, fingers brushing against his, the briefest contact sending a shiver of certainty through her spine. In that gesture lay a universe of promise, a defiance of the world's cruelty that neither note nor rumor could undo. Around them, society's murmurs continued, sharp and unrelenting, but within the small, sacred circle formed by candlelight, petals, and quiet glances, the heroine discovered a first taste of empowerment, that love, even in its most cautious form, could rise above scandal. By nightfall, as the city slumbered beneath fog and gaslight, she reflected on the day's tumult, on the scandalous murmurs, the threatening whispers, and the Duke's unwavering attention. The tension of societal expectation pressed against her, yes, but she no longer faced it entirely alone. Each token, each subtle act, was a message of persistence, a beacon in the frost of public disdain. And though the world continued to judge, she had begun to understand that courage often wore the guise of quiet acceptance, and that her heart's rebellion was only just beginning. The stage was set, the heroine now entangled in the delicate web of admiration, rumor, and defiance, poised at the precipice of intimacy and scandal. And as the night deepened, the audience, like the lady herself, could not help but anticipate the next act. The whispered confession, the stolen glance, the bold gesture that might finally challenge the rigid cruelty of London society. To speak what the heart conceals is to risk ruin and salvation in equal measure. The garden behind Ashbourne House lay cloaked in the gentle hush of midnight, the moon casting silvered shadows across hedgerows and ivy-clad trellises. Dew glistened upon the petals of roses, trembling in the faintest stir of a summer wind, and the air carried the faint scent of damp earth and promise. It was here, away from the scrutinizing eyes of society, that she found herself drawn by an urgency she scarcely understood, a summons she dared not ignore. He was already there when she arrived, a solitary figure standing beneath the arched lattice of climbing roses. The Duke's posture was both relaxed and deliberate, the shadows of the moonlight accentuating the sharp lines of his jaw and the quiet intensity of his gaze. Yet there was no triumph, no ostentation in his presence, only an undeniable gravity, as if the world itself had contracted to the small space they occupied. Her steps were hesitant, boots brushing softly against the gravel, and with each one her pulse quickened. She had rehearsed countless conversations, yet all of them seemed inadequate in the face of the profound silence that awaited her. "You summon me?" she asked, voice barely above the whisper of leaves. The words trembled on her lips, betraying a vulnerability she had not allowed herself to display before any living soul. He inclined his head slightly, expression inscrutable, yet the faintest curve of a smile softened his otherwise austere features. "I wish to speak where the world's ears cannot reach," he said, his tone low, controlled, and deliberate, carrying a weight that seemed to settle around them like a protective cloak. "There are truths I cannot whisper in crowded rooms, and perhaps fears you have yet to confess." The words struck her with the force of recognition. She had long carried the burden of shame, the echoes of ridicule and the sharp sting of whispered judgments, and now, standing before him, she felt compelled to release the constriction around her chest. She drew a breath, fragile yet resolute. "I fear that I am unworthy," she admitted, the confession slipping past her lips like a fragile bird taking flight. "Unworthy of kindness, of admiration, of the attention you have so recklessly bestowed upon me." The Duke's gaze softened, but he did not step closer, maintaining a respectful distance that paradoxically amplified the intimacy of the moment. "Worthiness is determined not by the fickle standards of society, but by the courage one summons in moments of exposure," he replied, his voice a gentle murmur, steady as a heartbeat. "You have shown courage simply by standing here, by acknowledging your fear instead of allowing it to consume you." She lowered her eyes, ashamed and emboldened at once, tracing the patterns of moonlight on the gravel with the tip of her gloved fingers. "And yet," she whispered, "I fear that even courage will not shield me from the venom of those who delight in another's humiliation." Her voice faltered, but he lifted a hand, not to touch, yet close enough that the mere proximity seemed to bridge a chasm of loneliness. "The world may delight in cruelty, and society may impose its iron standards," he said, "but there are eyes that see beyond superficialities, beyond the judgments of fashion and fortune. I see you, truly, and I will not relent in that knowledge." Her breath caught, and for the first time in weeks, the ice around her heart trembled. The vulnerability in her chest, the longing for understanding and acceptance, coalesced into a fragile ember of hope. Yet even as warmth began to bloom, a shadow intruded, a faint rustle of movement from the estate, the sense that their solitude might be interrupted, that the delicate veil of privacy could be torn away by servants, guests, or scandal. She took a tentative step closer, and the air seemed to thrum between them, charged with unspoken admissions. Why do you care?" she asked, voice barely audible, trembling with the intimacy of her inquiry. His answer was neither grandiose nor theatrical. It was measured, precise, yet imbued with a sincerity that resonated in the quiet night. "Because in you, I witness a fortitude that the world refuses to honor, a beauty the world has not learned to recognize. To deny that is to deny myself the truth I cannot escape." A shiver ran through her, not from the cool night air, but from the intensity of his gaze, the gravity of his words, the sudden, undeniable awareness that she was no longer alone in her struggle against the sharp edges of society. The garden, with its whispering leaves and glimmering moonlight, seemed to contract around them, a sanctuary of confession where every fear and longing could breathe freely, unjudged. Yet tension lingered, a delicate thread woven through the intimacy. The heroine knew that this revelation, as intoxicating and heart-stirring as it was, could not yet be fully trusted. Society's gaze remained relentless, and one misstep could undo the fragile progress she had made. She lifted her eyes to meet his, A flicker of daring curiosity ignited in her chest, and in that moment, both recognized the precipice on which they stood, between confession and consequence, intimacy and scandal, vulnerability and the first steps toward a shared courage. The night deepened, shadows stretching across the paths and arches, and she felt the stirrings of a daring truth within herself, that perhaps the heart, once spoken to, could find strength even in the face of societal cruelty. Their hands hovered near one another, close enough to brush but restrained by propriety, and yet the air seemed to hum with the promise of what might be. As she departed, slipping silently back through the dew-drenched paths to the refuge of her chamber, the Duke remained beneath the roses, watching her retreat, a solitary figure cloaked in shadow. The private confession, tender and fraught, had been offered, and though nothing had been declared aloud, a bond had been forged, delicate, secret, and poised to ignite. Society remained unrelenting, scandal whispered still in the corridors of London, yet a quiet revolution had begun in two hearts, unseen but undeniable. Better to be feared by society than to be unloved in the silence of one's own heart. The grand ballroom of Ashbourne House shimmered beneath an opulent cascade of candlelight, chandeliers spilling golden brilliance onto polished parquet floors, while walls lined with gilded mirrors reflected 1,000 judgmental gazes. Tonight, the air was thick with anticipation. Society's elite had gathered in glittering finery, eager for spectacle, and yet unaware that the most extraordinary performance would not be in their carefully orchestrated waltz or whispered intrigues, but in the quiet, daring defiance of one lady standing at the room's periphery. She entered, gown of deep sapphire catching the candlelight like water in motion, cheeks flushed with a mixture of apprehension and determination. The murmurs rose almost immediately, critiques of her appearance, speculation about her intentions, and the inevitable gossip about her growing association with the Duke. Each word, each glance, sought to wound, to reduce her to the fragile figure they had labeled weeks before. Yet she walked with her head held high, every step an assertion of her dignity reclaimed from the cruelty that had so recently consumed her. And there he was, the Duke, standing near the orchestra, the very embodiment of poise and authority. His gaze, sharp and unflinching, met hers across the crowded room, a silent signal that the private truths they had shared were no longer to be confined. In that instant, the ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and murmuring elites, receded into insignificance. Only their connection remained, palpable and electric. She approached him, the soft rustle of silk announcing her movement like the heralding of a quiet revolution. The whispers intensified, sharp and speculative, yet neither of them flinched. Tonight, the Duke's voice rose, clear and commanding, carrying effortlessly above the hum of conversation. I will not allow the world's cruelty to dictate the measure of what I see. The room stilled. Candles flickered. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned toward them, but the gravity of his presence silenced their commentary, if only momentarily. The heroine's breath caught, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her. She had feared society's judgment, the relentless glare of expectation, yet now she felt the power of a choice wholly her own. And I, she said, voice steady despite the tremor beneath, will no longer hide behind the shadows of their whispers. I am done cowering before their opinions. The Duke extended a hand, the simple gesture charged with intention and promise. She took it, fingers brushing in that delicate, electric contact that had become their secret language. Together then, he said, we stand not as pawns to gossip, but as arbiters of our own hearts. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly, some admiring, others scandalized. A lady fainted discreetly behind a fan. A gentleman's jaw tightened in disbelief. Yet in the midst of judgment and astonishment, they moved as one, each step a defiance of societal constraint, each glance a declaration of unyielding connection. The ballroom, for all its grandeur and gossip, became a stage for courage, for audacity, for the reclamation of dignity and love. The heroine felt the weight of weeks of humiliation, whispers, and subtle rejections lift from her shoulders, replaced by a fierce clarity. She realized that the power she had feared, the oppressive judgment of London's elite, could not penetrate the bond forged in whispered confessions and stolen moments. She no longer needed to seek approval, she had claimed it in the eyes of the one who mattered, the Duke whose understanding and courage had been steadfast. He spoke again, low enough for her ears alone, yet audible over the hush that had fallen. No veil of ridicule can touch what is earned through courage. No whisper of society can undo the truth we have built. Their union, though delicate and defiant, was visible to all, a spectacle far more thrilling than any gown, waltz, or carefully contrived social maneuver. And yet, in that visibility lay its power, society could not ignore the quiet triumph of a heart unbowed. The whispers, sharp as they were, became irrelevant beside the undeniable gravity of what had been declared. For the first time she felt entirely seen, not as an object of scorn, but as a woman of strength, spirit, and worth. Every act of cruelty that had sought to diminish her, every whispered judgment, had inadvertently led her to this moment. A public affirmation of private devotion, a triumph of dignity over derision, love over fear. As they turned together toward the ornate windows, moonlight pooling at their feet, the ballroom seemed to breathe around them, holding its collective breath in astonished silence. She lifted her eyes to meet his, and in that gaze, all hesitation, all doubt, and all fear dissolved. The declaration had been made, the resolution achieved, not through defiance for its own sake, but through courage, honesty, and the fearless embrace of truth. Society could murmur, could speculate, could attempt to contain the audacity of what they had witnessed, but the heroine knew with absolute certainty that no scandal, no whisper, no judgment could ever touch the bond they had forged. And as the Duke pressed a gentle kiss to her gloved hand, the first real spark of triumph warmed her chest, a light that promised the final act. Their hearts, fully united, poised to confront whatever world still dared to cast its shadow. In the warmth of love, even the cruelest frost melts, leaving only the brilliance of what was once hidden. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Ashbourne House, gilding every surface with a tender golden light. The ballroom, stripped of last night's glittering candles, was now calm, yet charged with the echoes of what had transpired. Society's elite had retired, whispers still clinging to polished corridors, yet the heroine moved through the empty room with the ease of one who had reclaimed herself. Each step upon the parquet felt deliberate, imbued with the certainty of hard-won courage. He awaited her by the arched windows, the Duke, framed by shafts of sunlight, his posture relaxed yet radiating authority. His eyes, unwavering, met hers, and in that glance lay the summation of weeks of whispered notes, private confessions, and quiet defiance. The world outside could judge, gossip, and condemn, but within this room, in this intimate interlude, no voice held dominion over the truth of their hearts. She approached, gloved hands clasped before her, yet her shoulders squared with newfound resolve. "The world has not been kind," she began, voice steady though her pulse thrummed with anticipation. "Yet I find that kindness need not be sought there. It exists here, in the courage to claim it, in the truth of what we feel." He stepped closer, the faintest smile touching his lips, eyes reflecting both admiration and quiet pride. "And in claiming it, you have rendered their cruelty powerless. Their whispers cannot diminish what we have built together." The words were simple, yet each syllable struck like a bell, clear and resonant, declaring a triumph no scandal could undo. The heroine lifted her chin, sunlight warming her face, the faintest hint of blush betraying the depth of her emotions. "I have learned," she said, "that beauty is not the currency of worth, nor society's favor the measure of courage. I will no longer cower before judgment. I will live, and love, without apology." The Duke extended his hand, a gesture both formal and intimate, an invitation to defiance and union. She placed hers within it, their fingers entwining in a silent covenant. Around them, the room seemed to breathe, shadows retreating as light claimed every corner, a mirror to the clarity they had forged within themselves. A servant knocked gently at the door, hesitant, but the Duke did not flinch. This was their moment, untouched by societal expectation. "Let the world murmur," he said softly, voice carrying only to her ears, "for their whispers are no longer ours to heed. We have chosen differently, and that is our triumph." Her chest swelled with the fierce warmth of victory. The weeks of scorn, the icy gusts of ridicule, had led her here, not to revenge nor to bitterness, but to the undeniable joy of being fully recognized and cherished. She smiled, a slow, radiant bloom, and he matched it, the reflection of her triumph mirrored in his unwavering gaze. They moved together toward the balcony, the morning light casting long, glimmering reflections on the marble below. The city beyond, vast and indifferent, seemed suddenly smaller, softened by the knowledge that the most vital truths existed not in gossiping salons but in the courage to stand united, hearts bared and steadfast. He lowered his voice, a murmur meant solely for her. "What others call scandal, we call freedom. What they judge as audacity, we know as devotion. And in this devotion, nothing can touch us." She leaned slightly into him, the faintest contact, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to feel completely safe, not sheltered from the world but impervious to its attempts at cruelty. Their union was no longer tentative or secretive. It was declared, unshakable, a quiet rebellion against the superficial judgments that had once threatened to consume her. The garden below bloomed under the morning sun, roses nodding in the gentle breeze, petals glinting with dew. Within the warmth of that light, she understood that all she had endured, the whispers, the mockery, the cruel scrutiny, had been the forge through which her spirit had been strengthened. The Duke's presence had been the crucible in which her courage ignited, and now, together, they stood luminous and unyielding, a testament to love's power over fear. Their hands tightened together, and he inclined his head slightly, a gesture both formal and intimate, sealing a promise that no shadow of society could eclipse. In the quiet majesty of the room, filled with light and the faint scent of roses, they shared a single wordless understanding, that the frost of cruelty had melted, leaving only the brilliance of truth, courage, and love. The heroine's lips curved into a smile both serene and victorious. "Then let them watch," she whispered, voice carrying confidence born of experience. "Let them witness what they cannot understand. We have claimed what is ours, and it is enough." The Duke's eyes softened, and with one final deliberate brush of her hand he responded, "More than enough. It is everything." The camera of imagination lingers as they stand side by side, hands clasped, gazes aligned, the morning sun painting them in gold and shadow alike. London's elite may continue their whispers, yet the story they have forged, of courage, defiance, and unyielding love, cannot be denied. And so, in the quiet triumph of hearts laid bare, the final scene closes, leaving behind a testament to the enduring power of dignity, devotion, and the audacity to love despite the world's cruelty.